Can you imagine being so principled that you defend your enemies in court, knowing it could destroy your career, yet doing it anyway because justice demanded it? Picture a man so stubborn that he'd argue with kings, alienate allies, and sacrifice his own popularity to do what he believed was right. This is John Adams, America's most underappreciated founding father. A man who wielded pens and principles as weapons, who built America's diplomatic foundations through sheer determination, and who chose righteousness over popularity at every turn. His story is one of unwavering integrity in an age of compromise, of diplomatic brilliance achieved through stubborn honesty rather than charming deception. October 30, 1735. A baby boy is born in Braintree, Massachusetts, later renamed Quincy, in a modest farmhouse to a family of farmers and shoemakers. John Adams enters the world without wealth, aristocratic lineage, or obvious prospects for greatness. His father, also named John Adams, is a farmer, shoemaker, and local official, respected in the community but hardly wealthy. His mother, Susanna Boylston Adams, comes from a slightly more prominent family, giving young John some social connections but no fortune. The elder John Adams has clear expectations for his son: education. In Puritan Massachusetts, education is valued above almost everything else, seen as both moral duty and practical necessity. But young John initially resists these expectations. He loves the outdoors, enjoys working on the farm, and shows little enthusiasm for the rigorous Latin and Greek studies his father demands. When asked what he wants to do with his life, young John declares he wants to be a farmer like his father. His father responds with a lesson in reality. He takes young John out to work in the fields on the hottest day of summer, assigning him the hardest, most exhausting farm labor. After hours of brutal work, his father asks if he still wants to be a farmer. Young John, exhausted and aching, admits that perhaps education might be worthwhile after all. This moment shapes Adams's understanding of hard work and discipline, lessons he'll carry throughout his life. Adams enters Harvard College in 1751, at age 15, younger than most students, but academically prepared. Harvard in this era is small, perhaps 100 students total, and intensely focused on classical education. Students study Latin, Greek, mathematics, philosophy, and theology. The curriculum is designed to produce educated gentlemen and ministers, not practical businessmen. Adams thrives in this environment, his natural intelligence and increasingly disciplined work habits making him a successful student. But Adams struggles with what to do after graduation. His family expects him to become a minister, the most prestigious profession for educated young men in Massachusetts. Adams respects religion, but finds theology unsatisfying. He's more interested in practical questions about governance, law, and human nature than in abstract theological debates. He also chafes at the idea of spending his life delivering sermons and pastoral care. He wants something that engages his intellect more directly with the world's problems. After graduating in 1755, Adams takes a position teaching school in Worcester, Massachusetts, while he decides his future. Teaching provides income and time to think, but Adams finds it unsatisfying. He's restless, ambitious, and increasingly drawn to law as a profession that would allow him to engage with governance, justice, and public affairs without committing to the ministry. Law also offers potential for independence and prosperity that teaching cannot match. In 1756, Adams begins studying law under James Putnam, a Worcester attorney. Legal education in this era doesn't involve law schools. Aspiring lawyers study as apprentices with established attorneys, reading law books and observing court proceedings until deemed ready to practice. Adams throws himself into legal studies with characteristic intensity, reading voraciously and developing the analytical skills that will define his career. Adams is admitted to the Massachusetts bar in 1758 and returns to Braintree to establish his practice. Starting a law practice from nothing is difficult. Adams has no family connections to the legal profession, no established reputation, and limited financial resources. He takes whatever cases he can get, traveling throughout Massachusetts to various courts, gradually building a reputation for thorough preparation, logical arguments, and absolute honesty. His personality shapes his legal career in distinctive ways. Adams is stubbornly honest, refusing to take cases he doesn't believe in or to make arguments he thinks are false. This integrity wins respect, but also limits his income. Many potential clients want lawyers willing to bend truth to win cases. Adams also lacks the natural charm and social graces that help some lawyers build practices through personal relationships. He's somewhat awkward socially, intellectually intense, and prone to speaking his mind bluntly rather than diplomatically. But these seeming disadvantages actually serve Adams well in the long term. Clients who want honest legal advice rather than false reassurances seek him out. His reputation for integrity makes judges and juries trust his arguments. His thorough preparation often wins cases that more naturally talented but less diligent lawyers would lose. Slowly, methodically, Adams builds a successful legal practice. In 1764, Adams marries Abigail Smith, the daughter of a congregational minister. This marriage proves to be one of the most important partnerships in American history. Abigail is extraordinarily intelligent, well-read despite limited formal education available to women, and possessed of judgment that Adams comes to trust absolutely. Throughout their marriage, Adams will consult Abigail on political questions, rely on her management of family finances and property when he's traveling, and value her insights above almost anyone else's. Their correspondence during the many years Adams spends away from home provides extraordinary insight into both their relationship and the revolutionary era they're living through. Abigail writes about managing the farm and children during Adams's absences, about local conditions and public opinion, and about political philosophy and governance. John writes about his diplomatic missions, his political struggles, and his reflections on history and human nature. Their letters reveal a marriage of genuine intellectual partnership, rare for their era. By 1765, John Adams has established himself as a rising attorney in Massachusetts, married to a remarkable woman, and building a life of modest prosperity and growing reputation. He's 30 years old, ambitious, intellectually formidable, and absolutely committed to principles of justice and law. He has no idea that within a decade, these qualities will thrust him into the center of a revolutionary movement that will create a new nation. But the pieces are all in place: the education, the legal training, the moral conviction, the stubborn integrity, and the partnership with Abigail. When crisis comes, John Adams will be ready. The crisis begins with a piece of paper, the Stamp Act of 1765. Britain's Parliament, seeking to raise revenue from the American colonies to pay debts from the French and Indian War, imposes a tax on all printed materials: newspapers, legal documents, licenses, even playing cards. Every document must carry an official stamp showing the tax has been paid. For lawyers like John Adams, who deal constantly with legal documents, the Stamp Act is both personally costly and constitutionally offensive. Adams opposes the Stamp Act not primarily because of its financial burden, but because of the principle it violates. He argues that Parliament has no right to tax the colonies directly because colonists aren't represented in Parliament. No taxation without representation isn't just a slogan. It's a fundamental constitutional principle that Adams believes British law itself supports. Adams writes essays arguing against the Stamp Act, developing legal and constitutional arguments that will become central to the revolutionary cause. The Stamp Act protests reveal Adams's approach to political conflict: principled, legal, and insistent on constitutional arguments rather than mob violence. When protests in Boston turn violent, Adams disapproves. He supports resistance to unjust laws, but wants that resistance conducted through legal channels: petitions, essays, legal challenges, rather than through riots and property destruction. This preference for legal process over violence will characterize Adams's entire career. Then comes the event that will test Adams's principles most severely: the Boston Massacre of March 5, 1770. British soldiers stationed in Boston have been harassed for months by crowds of colonists who resent their presence. On this night, tensions explode. A crowd confronts soldiers guarding the custom house, throwing snowballs, ice, and rocks, daring the soldiers to fire. The soldiers, frightened and confused, do fire, killing 5 colonists. The city erupts in fury, demanding the soldiers be prosecuted for murder. The British soldiers need legal defense, but no Boston lawyer wants to take the case. Defending hated British soldiers who killed colonists would be professional suicide and possibly physical danger. The soldiers' commander, Captain Thomas Preston, desperately seeks counsel. Finally, he approaches John Adams. Adams is known for his legal skill and his commitment to due process and fair trials. If anyone might defend the soldiers on principle rather than politics, it's Adams. Adams faces an agonizing decision. Defending the soldiers will make him deeply unpopular, might destroy his legal practice, and could be seen as betraying the patriot cause he's supported. But he also believes absolutely in the principle that everyone deserves legal defense and fair trial. If the soldiers are guilty, they should be convicted based on evidence, not mob justice. If they're innocent, or if their actions were legally justified, they shouldn't be convicted to satisfy public anger. Adams accepts the case. His explanation is simple. Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. He will defend the soldiers because that's what justice requires, regardless of personal cost or public opinion. This decision reveals the core of Adams's character: his absolute commitment to principle, even when it's personally costly. The trial is contentious. Adams doesn't deny that the soldiers fired or that colonists died. Instead, he argues that the soldiers acted in self-defense, that they faced a mob threatening their lives, and that under those circumstances, firing was legally justified. He calls witnesses demonstrating that the crowd was large, aggressive, and threatening. He argues that even British soldiers have the right to defend themselves when attacked. The jury acquits Captain Preston and most of the soldiers. 2 soldiers are convicted of manslaughter rather than murder, receiving relatively light punishment. Adams has won, securing fair trials and appropriate verdicts based on evidence rather than passion. But the political cost is significant. Many patriots view Adams as a traitor for defending the hated soldiers. His legal practice suffers as clients avoid him. He's deeply unpopular in exactly the political circles he's been building relationships with. But something remarkable happens. Over time, Adams's reputation recovers and actually improves. People recognize that his willingness to defend the soldiers, despite personal cost, demonstrates extraordinary integrity. Here's a man who won't compromise his principles even when it hurts him personally, who believes in justice strongly enough to defend his enemies. This reputation for principled integrity becomes one of Adams's greatest political assets. People may not always like him, but they trust that he'll do what he believes is right, regardless of consequences. This episode also demonstrates Adams's belief in law as civilization's foundation. Violence, mob rule, and passion lead to chaos and injustice. Only law, fairly applied to everyone, regardless of whether they're popular or hated, can provide justice and social order. This belief will shape Adams's approach to revolution. He supports breaking from Britain, but wants that break conducted legally, through proper governmental processes, creating a new nation based on law rather than merely on military victory. As tensions between Britain and the colonies escalate through the early 1770s, Adams becomes increasingly active in revolutionary politics. He's elected to the Massachusetts legislature, writes essays arguing for colonial rights, and becomes one of Boston's most prominent patriot leaders. But he maintains his insistence on legal process and constitutional argument. Revolution, if it comes, should be justified by law and principle, not merely by desire for independence. In 1774, Adams is selected as a Massachusetts delegate to the Continental Congress, the gathering of colonial representatives in Philadelphia to coordinate response to British policies. This positions Adams at the absolute center of revolutionary politics. He'll spend the next decade primarily in Philadelphia, Europe, and various diplomatic posts, seeing his family only occasionally, sacrificing his legal practice and personal comfort for public service. At the Continental Congress, Adams emerges as one of the most vocal advocates for independence. Many delegates still hope for reconciliation with Britain, but Adams increasingly believes separation is inevitable and necessary. He argues forcefully in congressional debates, writes essays laying out constitutional arguments for independence, and works to build support among hesitant delegates. Adams also demonstrates practical organizational ability. He advocates creating a continental army to coordinate colonial military resistance rather than relying on separate colonial militias. When Congress agrees, Adams nominates George Washington as commander-in-chief. This nomination is both politically astute — Washington is a Virginian helping to unite New England and Southern colonies — and personally selfless, as Adams could have sought the position for himself or another New Englander. By 1776, momentum toward independence is building, but many delegates remain hesitant. Adams becomes what one historian called the Atlas of Independence, the person who carries the weight of pushing Congress toward the decisive break with Britain. He argues in debates, lobbies hesitant delegates privately, and coordinates with other independence advocates to build majority support. When Congress finally appoints a committee to draft a Declaration of Independence, Adams is an obvious choice. But Adams makes a crucial decision. He insists that Thomas Jefferson write the document rather than doing it himself. Adams's reasoning is characteristically astute. Jefferson writes more elegantly, is a Virginian, balancing Adams's New England origin, and hasn't made as many political enemies through harsh debate. Adams understands that sometimes the best service is enabling others to shine rather than claiming glory oneself. On July 2, 1776, Congress votes for independence. 2 days later, they approve Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. Adams writes to Abigail, "The 2nd day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival." He's wrong about the date. July 4th becomes the celebrated anniversary, but right about the epochal importance. John Adams has been instrumental in achieving American independence through argument, organization, and relentless advocacy. But independence is just the beginning. The new nation must win military victory, secure international recognition and support, and create a functioning government. Adams will play crucial roles in all these challenges, but his most important contribution will be in diplomacy, representing America in Europe, securing the foreign loans and alliances that make independence sustainable, and establishing America's international standing. That diplomatic career begins almost immediately. as Congress sends Adams on the most dangerous mission of his life, crossing the Atlantic during wartime to seek French support for the Revolution. February 1778. John Adams, age 42, stands on a dock in Massachusetts, preparing to board the frigate Boston for a voyage across the Atlantic to France. He's been appointed by Congress to join the American diplomatic mission in Paris, seeking French military and financial support for the Revolution. This mission is extraordinarily dangerous. British naval vessels patrol the Atlantic, and any American ship is subject to capture. If Adams is captured, he'll likely be imprisoned or worse, as a traitor to the crown. Adams makes a decision that reveals his character. He brings his 10-year-old son, John Quincy Adams, with him on this dangerous voyage. His reasoning is both paternal and educational. Young John Quincy will receive an education in Europe, learning languages and experiencing the world in ways impossible in America. More importantly, Adams believes the boy should witness history being made, should see firsthand the diplomatic struggles that will shape the new nation. The decision is risky. Father and son might both die at sea or be captured. But Adams believes the educational opportunity justifies the risk. The voyage is a nightmare. The Boston encounters violent Atlantic storms that damage the ship and terrify passengers and crew. British warships are spotted, forcing evasive maneuvers. The ship's cannons engage British vessels briefly before escaping. Adams, who's never been comfortable at sea, is miserably seasick for much of the 6-week journey. But he uses the voyage productively, studying French and reading works on diplomacy and European politics, preparing for the mission ahead. When Adams arrives in France in April 1778, he enters a world completely alien to him. Paris is sophisticated, cosmopolitan, morally loose by Adams's Puritan standards. The French court operates through elaborate social rituals, subtle intrigues, and personal relationships, rather than through the direct, honest dealings Adams prefers. The language barrier is severe. Adams's French is rudimentary, forcing him to communicate through interpreters or struggle through conversations. Adams also encounters immediate problems with the existing American diplomatic mission. Benjamin Franklin, already in Paris as America's primary representative, has adopted French manners and social customs, attending salons, charming French aristocrats, and operating through personal relationships and social influence. Franklin is beloved in Paris, seen as the embodiment of American simplicity and virtue, while simultaneously being sophisticated enough to function in French society. Adams and Franklin clash almost immediately. Their personalities are opposite. Franklin is charming, diplomatic, comfortable with moral ambiguity. Adams is blunt, principled, uncomfortable with anything that seems like deception. Franklin works through personal relationships and indirect persuasion. Adams prefers direct argument and explicit agreements. Franklin has learned to work within French systems. Adams finds those systems corrupt and frustrating. More fundamentally, Adams and Franklin disagree about America's relationship with France. Franklin believes America should cultivate French support through gratitude and deference, recognizing that France is doing America an enormous favor by supporting the revolution. Adams believes America and France have parallel interests in opposing Britain, that American independence serves French strategic goals, and that America should negotiate as an equal partner rather than as a grateful supplicant. This disagreement reflects different strategic visions. Franklin fears that appearing too independent will offend France and lose crucial support. Adams fears that appearing too dependent will make America a French puppet, trading British control for French control without achieving genuine independence. Both concerns have merit, and the tension between them will shape American foreign policy for years. Adams finds himself frustrated and marginalized in Paris. Franklin has already established relationships and working methods. The French court deals primarily with Franklin, who speaks French fluently and understands court protocols. Adams, with limited French and no patience for elaborate courtesies, is largely sidelined. He writes bitter letters to Abigail, complaining about Franklin's methods and the general corruption of European diplomacy. But Adams refuses to simply go home or accept marginalization. He studies French intensively, improving his communication abilities. He writes reports to Congress, describing the diplomatic situation and arguing for his views on French-American relations. He seeks opportunities to make himself useful, offering to handle tasks that Franklin and the mission's other members aren't addressing. Adams is stubborn. If he's been sent to Paris to serve America, he'll find ways to serve, regardless of obstacles. One task Adams undertakes is managing the mission's finances and record-keeping. The American diplomatic mission's accounts are chaotic. Money comes from various sources, is spent on various purposes, and isn't properly documented. Adams, with his legal training and meticulous nature, begins organizing the accounts, creating proper record-keeping systems, and ensuring that American funds are tracked and spent appropriately. This isn't glamorous work, but it's necessary, and it gives Adams a role that utilizes his skills. Meanwhile, Adams observes European politics closely, learning how power actually functions at the international level. He sees that nations have no permanent friends or enemies, only permanent interests. He observes how treaties are negotiated, how nations manipulate each other, how moral claims are used to justify strategic calculations. This education in realpolitik doesn't change Adams's belief in moral principles, but it teaches him how those principles must be defended in a world where not everyone shares them. By late 1778, Adams is growing convinced that his presence in Paris is redundant and that he could serve America better elsewhere. Congress has sent multiple commissioners to France, creating confusion about who speaks for America. Franklin is clearly the primary voice, and Adams's attempts to influence French policy are largely unsuccessful. Adams requests recall to America, arguing that he's not needed in Paris and that he could be more useful in other roles. In 1779, Adams returns to America, having accomplished little of diplomatic importance in France, but having learned crucial lessons about European politics, about his own diplomatic strengths and weaknesses, and about the challenges America faces in achieving genuine independence in a world of powerful, cynical European states. He's convinced that America needs diplomatic representation beyond France, particularly in the Netherlands, where financial power resides and where American interests might be advanced without the complications of French mediation. But Congress has different plans for Adams. Before he can settle back into life in Massachusetts, he receives a new commission, return to Europe, but this time to the Netherlands rather than France. The mission is to secure Dutch recognition of American independence and, more importantly, to secure loans from Dutch bankers that America desperately needs to continue the war. This mission will allow Adams to operate independently rather than in Franklin's shadow, to utilize his particular skills, and to make contributions to American independence that are uniquely his own. In November 1779, Adams sails for Europe again, once more bringing John Quincy Adams, and now also his 9-year-old son, Charles. The voyage is even more dangerous than the previous one. The ship encounters worse storms and actually springs leaks that threaten to sink it. At one point, the ship is so damaged it must put into port in Spain, requiring Adams and his sons to travel overland across Spain and France to reach the Netherlands. A journey of months through territories where being American is dangerous and resources are limited. The difficulties of this journey would discourage most people, but Adams is energized by the challenge. He's finally on a mission where he can work independently, where success depends on his own abilities rather than on coordinating with other diplomats he disagrees with. where he can prove that his approach to diplomacy, based on honesty, persistence, and appeal to mutual interests, rather than on charm and social manipulation, can succeed. The mission to the Netherlands will prove to be the greatest diplomatic triumph of Adams's life, but it will require 3 years of the most intense, frustrating, and occasionally desperate effort imaginable. Adams arrives in Amsterdam in August 1780 to begin what will become the most difficult and personally costly mission of his diplomatic career. The Netherlands, a confederation of provinces dominated by wealthy merchants and bankers, is the financial capital of Europe. If Adams can secure Dutch loans, America will have the money to continue the war. If he can secure Dutch recognition of American independence, it will demonstrate that America's legitimacy extends beyond its alliance with France. But achieving either goal seems nearly impossible. The Netherlands is officially neutral in the war between Britain and its rebellious colonies. But neutrality is complicated. The Dutch make enormous profits trading with all sides, and many Dutch merchants have commercial ties to Britain going back generations. The Dutch government, such as it is, given the Confederation's complex political structure, is terrified of British retaliation if it openly supports America. The Dutch remember past wars with Britain and have no desire to provoke another one. Moreover, Adams arrives without official diplomatic credentials. He's not formally accredited as America's minister to the Netherlands. That would require Dutch recognition of American independence, which is exactly what he's trying to achieve. He's caught in a circular problem. He needs recognition to get credentials, but he needs credentials to seek recognition. He must somehow convince the Dutch to take the unprecedented step of recognizing a rebel government that might still be crushed by Britain. Adams establishes himself in Amsterdam and begins the slow, frustrating work of building relationships and making his case. He publishes essays in Dutch newspapers explaining America's cause. He meets with Dutch merchants, bankers, and political leaders, arguing that American independence serves Dutch interests by weakening Britain and creating new commercial opportunities. He writes detailed analyses of American resources, governance, and military prospects, trying to convince the skeptical Dutch that America will survive and that supporting it is a sound investment rather than reckless idealism. The work is exhausting and often humiliating. Adams must essentially beg for meetings with Dutch officials who often refuse to see him or who receive him with barely disguised condescension. He's representing a country that many Europeans view as a temporary rebellion that will be crushed. And Dutch politicians don't want to risk British anger by being too friendly with this American troublemaker. Adams writes to Abigail, describing his frustration at being treated as insignificant, at having his careful arguments dismissed, at feeling isolated and ineffective. The isolation is both political and personal. Adams is living alone in Amsterdam. He's sent his sons to be educated elsewhere in Europe, and Abigail remains in America. He has few friends, limited social life, and spends most of his time working in his rooms, writing letters, preparing arguments, and trying to advance his mission through sheer determination and endless effort. The Dutch winter is cold and damp, affecting Adams's health. He becomes seriously ill in fall 1780, suffering from what's probably a combination of flu, exhaustion, and depression. For weeks, Adams is bedridden, feverish, and convinced he might die in this foreign city, far from his family, his mission unaccomplished. He's in his mid-40s, physically worn down by years of travel and stress, emotionally exhausted by frustration and isolation. He writes to Abigail, expressing his misery and his longing to return home. But even in illness, Adams continues working. He writes letters from his bed, develops new strategic approaches to his mission, and refuses to simply give up and go home. As Adams slowly recovers, he refines his strategy. He realizes that the Dutch government won't act until public opinion supports it, and public opinion won't change without education. So Adams embarks on what amounts to a public relations campaign, writing extensively for Dutch newspapers and pamphlets, explaining American government, resources, and commercial opportunities. He publishes detailed information about American state constitutions, demonstrating that Americans are creating stable, republican governments rather than descending into chaos. He also works to build coalitions of support among Dutch groups who have various reasons to favor American independence. Merchants who want access to American trade, political reformers who see American republicanism as a model, and anti-British factions who want to weaken Britain. Adams cultivates all these groups, making alliances based on mutual interests, rather than relying solely on moral arguments about supporting freedom. Slowly, painfully, Adams's strategy begins working. Dutch newspaper coverage of America becomes more favorable. Dutch political leaders become more willing to meet with him. Merchants express interest in American commerce. The idea that American independence might actually happen, and that the Netherlands could benefit from supporting it, gains traction. Adams isn't creating this change through charm or personal relationships. He's doing it through relentless argument, detailed information, and appeal to Dutch self-interest. Then, in December 1780, events outside Adams's control suddenly advance his cause. Britain declares war on the Netherlands over Dutch support for American trade, ending Dutch neutrality. Now the Dutch are at war with Britain anyway, making the risk of supporting America much lower. The British Declaration also creates anti-British sentiment in the Netherlands that Adams can build on. What seemed impossible suddenly becomes achievable. But achieving it still requires enormous effort. Adams must now convince the Dutch government, actually the governments of multiple Dutch provinces, each with its own decision-making process, to formally recognize American independence. This requires lobbying provincial assemblies, building majority support in each province, and coordinating timing so that recognition moves forward across the Confederation. Adams undertakes this organizational work with characteristic persistence, attending meetings, writing letters, following up on commitments, and gradually building the coalition needed for success. The campaign takes over a year of intense work. Adams coordinates with Dutch supporters, provides them with arguments and information, helps them navigate their own political processes, and maintains pressure through continued public writing and private lobbying. It's diplomatic work of a kind he's well suited for, not social charm, but organized, persistent, detailed advocacy based on clear arguments and mutual interests. On April 19, 1782, exactly 7 years after the battles of Lexington and Concord began the Revolutionary War, the Netherlands officially recognizes the United States of America as an independent nation. This is the second country after France to grant such recognition, and it's achieved through Adams's sole efforts without French mediation. Adams writes to Abigail with pride and relief, "This is the happiest day of my life." But recognition alone isn't enough. Adams still needs to secure the loans that motivated this mission. Through months of additional negotiation with Dutch banking houses, Adams finally secures a loan of 5 million guilders, roughly equivalent to $2 million, an enormous sum that will help finance the final years of the Revolutionary War and will establish America's international creditworthiness. This financial achievement is arguably more important than the diplomatic recognition, because it demonstrates that hard-headed bankers view America as a viable entity worthy of financial investment. Adams also establishes the first American embassy on foreign soil, renting a building in The Hague that becomes the United States' official diplomatic facility. This physical presence symbolizes American permanence and legitimacy in ways that individual diplomats traveling couldn't achieve. The embassy becomes a base for American diplomacy in Europe, a place where American interests can be represented continuously rather than sporadically. By late 1782, Adams has achieved a diplomatic triumph that rivals anything accomplished by Franklin or other American diplomats. He secured recognition from a major European power, obtained crucial financing for the war effort, and established permanent American diplomatic presence in Europe. All through his own efforts, working independently, succeeding through persistence and detailed argument, rather than through charm or French mediation. His belief that America should be treated as an equal sovereign power, rather than as a grateful dependent, has been vindicated. More personally, Adams has proven to himself that his approach to diplomacy can work. He's not Franklin. He can't charm foreign courts or work through social influence. But he can argue persistently, can organize campaigns, can appeal to interests, and can succeed through sheer determination and refusal to give up despite obstacles. This success in the Netherlands becomes the foundation for his continued diplomatic career and his own sense of having made unique contributions to American independence. The mission has cost him dearly. He spent 3 years away from his family, has suffered serious illness, has endured isolation and depression, and has sacrificed his health and personal comfort. But he's also achieved something remarkable and has established himself as one of America's most effective diplomats. Now he faces a new challenge. He's being called to Paris to join the negotiations for the peace treaty that will end the Revolutionary War. There, he'll work alongside Franklin and John Jay to secure American independence through treaty, and he'll face diplomatic challenges as complex as anything he's overcome in the Netherlands. By fall 1782, American military victory seems assured. British General Cornwallis's surrender at Yorktown in October 1781 has effectively ended major combat operations. Britain remains powerful, but political will to continue fighting has collapsed. The question now is not whether America will win independence, but what the terms of peace will be, what boundaries the new nation will have, what rights it will secure, and what obligations it will accept. John Adams is summoned from the Netherlands to Paris to join the peace negotiations alongside Benjamin Franklin and John Jay. These 3 men, despite their differences, must work together to secure the best possible treaty for America. The stakes are enormous. A good treaty will give America the territory, rights, and international standing to thrive as an independent nation. A bad treaty could leave America truncated, economically dependent, and vulnerable to future European manipulation. The diplomatic situation is complex. Britain is negotiating not just with America, but with France, Spain, and the Netherlands, all of whom have their own interests that don't necessarily align with American interests. France wants America independent, but weak and dependent on French support. Spain wants to limit American Western expansion to prevent American competition for territory. Britain wants to divide America from its European allies and to preserve as much economic influence as possible despite political separation. Adams brings to these negotiations a deep suspicion of French motives. He believes France supported American independence not from altruism but from desire to weaken Britain, and that France would prefer an America that remains dependent on French support, rather than becoming a truly independent power. He also believes that French Foreign Minister Vergennes is manipulating American diplomats, trying to control negotiations to serve French rather than American interests. This suspicion creates immediate friction. Congress has instructed the American negotiators to consult with France and to coordinate their negotiating strategy with French diplomats. Franklin is inclined to follow these instructions, trusting French good intentions. Adams argues that America should negotiate independently, pursuing American interests regardless of French preferences. He believes that total transparency with France will allow France to constrain American negotiating positions in ways that serve French rather than American goals. The conflict becomes acute over specific negotiating issues. The Mississippi River boundary is crucial. Should America's western border be the Appalachian Mountains, which France and Spain prefer, limiting American expansion, or the Mississippi River, which Americans claim based on colonial charters and conquest during the war? Fishing rights off Newfoundland are vital to New England's economy. Will Americans have perpetual rights to fish these waters, or will this right be negotiable in future treaties? Will British debts owed by Americans before the war be repaid, and will loyalists who remained loyal to Britain have their property restored? Adams takes hard positions on all these issues. America must have the Mississippi as its western boundary. Fishing rights must be permanent and non-negotiable. British debts should be addressed, but not in ways that bankrupt Americans. Loyalist property shouldn't be restored. They chose Britain over America and should face consequences. Adams argues these positions forcefully, both in negotiations with British representatives and in discussions with Franklin and Jay about American strategy. Remarkably, Adams and Jay convince Franklin to negotiate with Britain independently, rather than coordinating every move with France. They argue that the Peace Commission's instructions from Congress were written before the military situation clarified, that circumstances have changed, and that blindly following instructions to consult with France would betray American interests. Franklin, despite his friendship with Vergennes and his inclination to trust France, agrees to this independent approach. The decision to negotiate independently is risky. If France learns that American diplomats are conducting secret negotiations with Britain without French knowledge, Vergennes could become furious and possibly withdraw French support. But Adams argues that the risk is worth taking because only through independent negotiations can America secure its full territorial and commercial goals. The negotiators proceed carefully, conducting preliminary discussions with British representatives while maintaining public appearances of coordination with France. British negotiators, led by Richard Oswald, prove surprisingly willing to grant American demands. Britain's primary goal is ending the war and perhaps creating enough American goodwill to preserve commercial ties despite political separation. British negotiators are also willing to use generous terms to America as a way of driving wedges between America and France, weakening the Franco-American alliance that Britain fears. This British strategy serves American interests perfectly. America gets favourable terms, while Britain gets the satisfaction of annoying France. Through intensive negotiations in fall 1782, the outline of a treaty emerges. America will be recognized as fully independent, with boundaries extending from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River and from the Great Lakes to Florida. Americans will have permanent fishing rights off Newfoundland. British creditors can pursue debts through American courts, but Congress will only recommend that states restore Loyalist property rather than being required to do so. British forces will evacuate American territory promptly. These terms are extraordinarily favourable to America, far better than France or Spain wanted, better even than Congress had authorised negotiators to demand. Adams is jubilant. He writes to Abigail that the treaty secures everything America fought for and establishes the new nation on foundations for future greatness. The Mississippi boundary gives America vast territories for future expansion. The fishing rights protect New England's economy. The limited obligations regarding debts and loyalists prevent the treaty from being economically crushing. When Vergennes learns that American negotiators have been conducting independent negotiations and have reached preliminary terms without French involvement, he's predictably angry. He protests that this violates the Franco-American alliance and that America has been ungrateful for French support. Franklin crafts a diplomatic response, apologizing for the appearance of ingratitude while defending the negotiators' actions as necessary to serve American interests. The crisis passes. France is too invested in the overall peace process to seriously threaten the American treaty, and French anger fades as attention shifts to France's own treaty negotiations with Britain. The preliminary treaty is signed November 30th, 1782, and the final Treaty of Paris is signed September 3rd, 1783. The Revolutionary War is officially over. The United States of America is recognized internationally as an independent nation with generous boundaries and rights. Adams's diplomatic work in the Netherlands and in these peace negotiations has been as important to achieving independence as military victories at Saratoga and Yorktown. Adams reflects on what's been accomplished. America has fought a war against the world's most powerful empire and has won not just military victory, but international recognition as a legitimate nation. The treaty secures territorial and economic foundations for America to develop as a continental power. And it's been achieved partly through Adams's own efforts, his insistence on American independence from French control, his stubborn advocacy for maximum American goals, and his willingness to take diplomatic risks to serve American interests. But Adams also understands that independence is just the beginning. The new nation must create a functioning government, must develop economically, must maintain its independence against future European pressures. And Adams personally faces new diplomatic challenges. He's about to be appointed as America's first ambassador to Great Britain, meaning he'll represent the former colonies to the king and government they recently defeated in war. This assignment will require all of Adams's diplomatic skill, his ability to control his emotions, and his capacity to work toward practical goals, despite personal feelings and historical animosities. June 1st, 1785. John Adams stands in the court of St. James's, dressed in formal diplomatic attire, waiting to present his credentials to King George III as the first ambassador from the United States of America to the court of Great Britain. The irony is extraordinary. Adams, who argued passionately for independence, who helped draft the arguments justifying rebellion, who negotiated the treaty that forced Britain to recognize American sovereignty, is now about to bow before the king whose authority he spent years rejecting. The meeting is tense and emotionally charged for both men. King George III has spent years trying to suppress the American rebellion, has lost a war he was confident of winning, and has had to accept the humiliation of recognizing his former subjects as independent equals. Adams has fought against everything the king represents, yet now must treat him with diplomatic courtesy and work to establish positive relations between the two countries. As Adams bows and begins his formal presentation, he's overcome with emotion. His voice shakes as he presents his credentials and makes the traditional diplomatic statements. He manages to say, "I think myself more fortunate than all my fellow citizens in having the distinguished honor to be the first to stand in your Majesty's presence in a diplomatic character." But his emotional state is obvious to everyone present. King George responds with surprising grace. He acknowledges the difficult history between them, but expresses hope that the former differences can be replaced by commercial and cultural ties. The king says, "I was the last to consent to the separation, but the separation having been made and having become inevitable, I have always said, as I say now, that I would be the first to meet the friendship of the United States as an independent power." Then, in a moment that surprises Adams, the king asks, "Mr. Adams, do you believe you are the man who has the least confidence in France of any man in America?" Adams, recovering his composure, responds diplomatically, "I have no attachment, Your Majesty, but to my own country." This answer pleases the king while avoiding direct criticism of France. It's a moment of genuine connection between the two men, both of whom prioritize their country's interests above personal feelings or past grievances. But this moment of connection doesn't translate into diplomatic success. Adams's 3 years as ambassador to Britain prove largely frustrating and unsuccessful. Britain has agreed to American independence, but has no interest in making the separation comfortable for America. British merchants want to trade with America, but on British terms. British military forces are supposed to evacuate frontier forts according to the peace treaty, but don't, claiming American states haven't fulfilled treaty obligations regarding loyalist property and British debts. Adams tries to negotiate commercial treaties that would facilitate trade between the two countries on equal terms. Britain refuses, preferring to maintain commercial advantages and to treat American trade according to British convenience. Adams protests British military presence in frontier forts that, according to treaty, should have been evacuated. British officials respond that America hasn't fulfilled its treaty obligations either, so Britain isn't obligated to evacuate the forts. The fundamental problem is that Britain doesn't take America seriously as a nation. British officials see the United States as a weak, unstable confederation likely to collapse or splinter into smaller nations. The Articles of Confederation give the American national government little power, and states often ignore treaty obligations and pursue contradictory policies. Why should Britain negotiate seriously with a government that can't enforce its own treaties or speak credibly for its constituent states? Adams finds this situation humiliating and frustrating. He's representing America to its former imperial master, but he's representing a weak America that Britain can treat with casual disrespect. He can protest British violations of the peace treaty, but he has no power to force compliance. He can propose commercial treaties, but Britain can simply refuse to negotiate. He's a diplomat without leverage, representing a country whose weakness invites the contempt he's trying to overcome. The experience teaches Adams crucial lessons about international relations and governmental power. He learns that diplomatic courtesy and moral arguments mean little without the power to back them up. He realizes that America's weakness under the Articles of Confederation makes effective diplomacy nearly impossible. He becomes convinced that America needs a stronger national government with power to enforce treaties, regulate commerce, and speak credibly in international negotiations. These lessons will shape Adams's support for the Constitution when it's drafted in 1787. He'll advocate strongly for ratification, arguing that America needs stronger national government, not from abstract political theory, but from practical recognition that weak government makes international respect impossible. His 3 frustrating years in London demonstrate what happens when a nation lacks governmental power to match its diplomatic pretensions. Adams also uses his time in London productively in other ways. He writes extensively, producing a 3-volume work called A Defense of the Constitutions of Government of the United States of America. This massive treatise examines different forms of government, argues for balanced constitutions with separated powers, and defends Republican government against European critics. The work is read by delegates to the Constitutional Convention and influences debates about the structure of American government. He also finally brings Abigail to join him in London, ending years of separation. Abigail's presence makes Adams's life in London more bearable. She provides emotional support, manages their household, and offers political insights that Adams values highly. Together, they navigate London society, maintain their dignity despite occasional slights, and represent America as best they can under difficult circumstances. By 1788, Adams is ready to return home. He's accomplished little of concrete diplomatic value in London. No commercial treaty, no resolution of frontier forts, no meaningful improvement in Anglo-American relations. But he's learned important lessons about power and diplomacy, has contributed intellectually to debates about American government, and has maintained American diplomatic presence in Britain through a difficult period. Most importantly, He's ready to participate in the new American government that's being created under the Constitution he's supported. Adams doesn't know it yet, but he's about to become America's first vice president, serving under George Washington for 8 years before becoming president himself. His diplomatic career is ending, but his political career is reaching its peak. The lessons he's learned in Europe about power, about international relations, about the importance of strong government, about American vulnerability in a hostile world, will shape his approach to American domestic and foreign policy throughout his years in high office. April 1789. John Adams returns to America after a decade in Europe to assume an office he didn't seek and doesn't particularly want: Vice President of the United States. The Constitution, recently ratified, creates this position to succeed the President if necessary, and to preside over the Senate. Adams is elected Vice President almost automatically. Under the original constitutional system, the person with the second most electoral votes becomes Vice President, and Adams finishes second to George Washington, who is elected President unanimously. Adams's assessment of his new position is characteristically blunt. He writes to Abigail, "My country has in its wisdom contrived for me the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived, or his imagination conceived. The Vice President has only one constitutional duty: presiding over the Senate and casting tie-breaking votes when necessary. Otherwise, the office has no power, no responsibilities, and no clear purpose beyond being available if the President dies." For someone like Adams, who has been at the center of revolutionary politics, who has conducted crucial diplomacy, who has argued in Congress and negotiated treaties, being relegated to presiding over Senate debates without participating in them is torture. He must sit silently while senators debate, can't express his views or argue points, and can only vote when the Senate is tied. It's the constitutional equivalent of putting a racehorse in a stable and occasionally letting it walk around the paddock. Adams does take his presiding duties seriously, establishing precedents for Senate procedure and trying to maintain dignity and order in debates. But he also makes early mistakes that damage his reputation. He proposes elaborate titles for the president, suggesting His Highness, the President of the United States and Protector of their liberties, rather than the simple Mr. President. He argues that Republican government requires dignity and formality to command respect. Critics savage him for this proposal, suggesting Adams has aristocratic pretensions and doesn't understand Republican simplicity. The criticism hurts Adams deeply because it misrepresents his motives. He's not advocating monarchy or aristocracy. He's arguing that government needs dignity to be respected, especially in a world where European monarchies dominate. But the damage is done. Adams is labelled as someone with monarchist sympathies, a charge that will follow him throughout his political career. The vice presidency also forces Adams into awkward political positions. The new federal government immediately faces divisions between those who want strong national power, the Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, and those who fear national power threatens liberty, the Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson. Adams doesn't fit comfortably in either camp. He supports strong national government, but distrusts Hamilton's financial schemes. He values liberty, but thinks Republican fears of governmental power are excessive. Adams's relationship with Hamilton, Washington's Treasury Secretary, is particularly complex. Both are Federalists who support strong national government, but they distrust and dislike each other. Hamilton thinks Adams is vain, jealous, and too unpredictable. Adams thinks Hamilton is dangerous, overly ambitious, and willing to sacrifice Republican principles for power. This mutual hostility will shape Federalist politics for years and will eventually contribute to the party's collapse. Meanwhile, Adams's friendship with Thomas Jefferson his vice president after Adams becomes president, begins deteriorating under political pressure. Adams and Jefferson had been close during the Revolution, had worked together in Europe, and had genuine respect for each other. But partisan politics drives them apart. Jefferson leads the opposition to Federalist policies that Adams generally supports. Their political differences gradually poison their personal relationship, transforming friends into political enemies. During 8 years as vice president, Adams casts 31 tie-breaking votes in the Senate, more than any vice president in American history. Many of these votes support Federalist policies, funding the national debt, creating a national bank, and building federal power. Adams supports these policies not from partisanship, but from conviction that strong national government is necessary for America to survive in a hostile world. But his votes make him increasingly identified with federalism and increasingly unpopular with Republicans who dominate southern states. Adams also struggles with personal finances during this period. The vice president's salary is modest, and Adams has spent years in diplomatic service without accumulating wealth. His farm in Massachusetts requires investment and management that he can't provide while serving in Philadelphia, then the capital. Abigail manages their finances and property, but they're never financially comfortable, and Adams resents that public service has prevented him from building the prosperity that many of his contemporaries have achieved. By 1796, George Washington announces he won't seek a third term. Adams is the obvious Federalist candidate to succeed him, but the succession isn't automatic. Hamilton and other Federalists distrust Adams and attempt to manipulate the election to make Thomas Pinckney, the Federalist vice presidential candidate, actually win the presidency instead of Adams. The scheme fails, and Adams wins the presidency with 71 electoral votes to Jefferson's 68. But the close margin and the evidence of Federalist manipulation embitter Adams against Hamilton and make his relationship with his own party difficult from the start. Adams becomes president in March 1797, but Jefferson, who finished second, becomes his vice president under the original constitutional system. This creates the bizarre situation of a president and vice president from opposing political parties, destined to oppose each other politically while serving in the same administration. It's a recipe for dysfunction, and it will make Adams's presidency extraordinarily difficult. As Adams prepares to assume the presidency, he faces multiple challenges. Relations with France have deteriorated into an undeclared naval war. Britain continues violating American rights at sea. Partisan divisions threaten to tear the country apart, and Adams lacks the personal popularity and political capital that Washington enjoyed. He's inheriting power at a moment of crisis, without the personal authority or party unity to address that crisis effectively. But Adams doesn't seek to avoid difficulty. His entire life has been spent doing what he believes is right, regardless of political cost. He'll approach the presidency the same way, making decisions based on principle and long-term American interests, rather than on popularity or partisan advantage. This approach will lead to both his greatest achievement as president and to his political destruction. But that's a price Adams has always been willing to pay for doing what he believes duty requires. John Adams's presidency is dominated by a single crisis, the quasi-war with France. This undeclared naval conflict threatens to escalate into full war, and everything Adams does as president is shaped by his determination to prevent that escalation, while still defending American interests. His success in maintaining peace while facing enormous political pressure for war is his greatest presidential achievement, and the decision that costs him re-election. The crisis has complicated origins. France, angry about the Jay Treaty between America and Britain, which France views as American alignment with Britain, begins seizing American merchant ships in the Caribbean. French privateers capture hundreds of American vessels, confiscate their cargoes, and sometimes imprison their crews. France is essentially conducting economic warfare against America without formally declaring war. Adams responds by strengthening American naval forces and authorizing American ships to defend themselves. This creates an undeclared naval war. American and French vessels fight each other at sea. Captures and counter-captures occur, but neither nation formally declares war or commits to full-scale military operations. It's warfare in a grey zone, costly and dangerous, but not yet catastrophic. Many Federalists, particularly Hamilton and his allies, want to use the French crisis to declare full war. They argue that French attacks on American commerce are intolerable, that American honor demands military response, and that war would unite the country behind Federalist leadership. They also see political advantages. War would justify expanding the army, which Hamilton wants to command, would discredit Republicans who are sympathetic to France, and would consolidate Federalist power. Adams deeply distrusts these motives. He believes Hamilton wants war for political advantage rather than from genuine concern for American interests. More fundamentally, Adams understands that America can't afford war with France. The nation is young, financially weak, and lacks the military resources for sustained European warfare. War might satisfy honor and serve Federalist political interests, but it would devastate American commerce, drain the treasury, and risk national bankruptcy or worse. Moreover, Adams believes war is unnecessary. France and America have no fundamental conflicts of interest. French anger stems from perceived American alignment with Britain, not from deep strategic conflicts. If America can demonstrate its genuine neutrality and negotiate honorably with France, the crisis should be resolvable diplomatically. War would be a failure of diplomacy and statesmanship, chosen from passion or political calculation rather than from necessity. In 1798, Adams sends a 3-member peace commission to France to negotiate a settlement. The commission includes Federalist John Marshall, moderate Federalist Elbridge Gerry, and Republican Charles Pinckney, demonstrating bipartisan commitment to peace. Adams instructs them to seek an end to French attacks on American shipping and a restoration of normal diplomatic relations, but to make no agreements that compromise American independence or dignity. The peace mission initially fails spectacularly. French Foreign Minister Talleyrand, rather than negotiating directly, sends intermediaries who demand bribes and loans before formal negotiations can begin. The American commissioners refuse these demands, and news of the attempted bribery creates a scandal called the XYZ affair. The French intermediaries are referred to as X, Y, and Z in official reports. American public opinion erupts in anti-French fury. Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute, becomes the rallying cry. The XYZ affair creates enormous political pressure on Adams to declare war. Federalists in Congress demand it. Public opinion supports it. Adams's own cabinet, mostly loyal to Hamilton rather than to Adams, urges war. Hamilton begins maneuvering to position himself to command the expanded army that war would require. Adams faces perhaps the greatest political pressure of his presidency to do something he believes would be disastrous for the country. Adams refuses. Despite political pressure, public anger at France, and criticism from his own party, Adams maintains that war is unnecessary and that diplomacy can still succeed. He authorizes continued naval operations to defend American shipping, but he won't take the step of declaring full war. He's willing to defend American commerce and honor through limited military measures, but he won't commit America to the kind of total war that Federalist hawks desire. This decision requires extraordinary political courage. Adams is defying his own party's leadership, resisting public opinion, and accepting certain political damage in order to pursue what he believes is the right policy. He's prioritizing long-term national interests over short-term political advantage, choosing possible defeat in the next election over policies he thinks would harm the country. It's characteristic Adams: stubborn, principled, willing to sacrifice popularity for what he believes is right. Through 1799 and 1800, Adams pursues peace negotiations despite political opposition. He sends another mission to France, this time led by William Vans Murray, with instructions to negotiate a settlement. French politics have changed. Napoleon Bonaparte is consolidating power and wants to end the conflict with America to focus on European affairs. Negotiations proceed slowly but successfully. In September 1800, the Treaty of Mortefontaine, also called the Convention of 1800, is signed, ending the quasi-war. The treaty restores normal diplomatic relations between America and France, ends French attacks on American shipping, and resolves various legal disputes. It's not a total American victory. Some claims are left unresolved, and France doesn't provide compensation for previous captures. But it achieves peace without war, preserves American independence and neutrality, and avoids the catastrophic costs that full war would have imposed. Adams later describes this peace treaty as the most disinterested and meritorious action of my life. He's proud of having maintained peace despite enormous pressure for war, proud of having prioritized national interests over political advantage, proud of having trusted diplomacy when others demanded military action. He believes, correctly, that avoiding war with France saved America from potential disaster, and that this achievement justifies his presidency regardless of other failures or controversies. But the political cost is enormous. Federalist leaders are furious at Adams for defying them and for missing opportunities to expand Federalist power through war. Hamilton publicly attacks Adams, publishing a pamphlet questioning Adams's fitness for office and describing him as vain, jealous, and erratic. The Federalist Party fractures, divided between Adams supporters and Hamilton supporters, unable to present a united front in the 1800 election. Adams also damages himself through other controversial decisions. In 1798, during the peak of anti-French sentiment, Congress passes the Alien and Sedition Acts. These laws make it easier to deport foreigners, Alien Acts, and criminalize criticism of the federal government, Sedition Act. The Sedition Act is used to prosecute Republican newspaper editors and politicians who criticize Adams's administration. Adams signs these laws and allows their enforcement, a decision he will later regret. The laws are constitutionally questionable, politically disastrous, and morally problematic. They suppress legitimate political criticism and use federal power against political opponents. Republicans attack the laws as tyrannical, and their enforcement damages Adams's reputation for defending liberty and constitutional government. The laws become effective Republican campaign issues, helping to mobilize opposition to Adams's re-election. The 1800 election is bitter and divisive. Adams runs for re-election against Thomas Jefferson, his vice president, and now his political enemy. The campaign is vicious. Adams is accused of monarchist sympathies, of betraying Republican principles, of incompetence and vanity. Jefferson is accused of atheism, radicalism, and being a French puppet. Both sides use propaganda, personal attacks, and fear-mongering. Adams loses. Jefferson wins 73 electoral votes to Adams's 65. The Federalist Party is defeated, in part because of internal divisions between Adams and Hamilton factions. Adams becomes the first president to lose re-election, a humiliation that wounds him deeply. On Jefferson's inauguration day, Adams leaves Washington before dawn, refusing to attend the ceremony, beginning a retirement that will last 25 years. Adams leaves the presidency believing he has failed politically but succeeded as a leader. He made the decision to pursue peace with France, despite knowing it would cost him politically, because he believed peace served the national interest better than war. He prioritized long-term national welfare over short-term political advantage. He was willing to lose power rather than compromise what he believed was right. Whether this represents admirable principle or political incompetence depends on whether you value leadership that serves national interests over leadership that maintains political power. For Adams, the choice was never in doubt. Principle always came first. March 4, 1801. John Adams leaves Washington, D.C. before dawn, refusing to attend Thomas Jefferson's inauguration. He's humiliated by electoral defeat, angry at how he's been treated by Hamilton and other Federalists, bitter about what he sees as Jefferson's betrayal of their friendship for political advantage. Adams returns to Peacefield, his farm in Quincy, Massachusetts, convinced his public career is finished and that history will judge him harshly. The early years of retirement are difficult. Adams is only 65, but feels old and exhausted. His health is declining. He's developed tremors in his hands, has dental problems that make eating difficult, and suffers from various ailments that 18th century medicine can't effectively treat. Financially, he's comfortable but not wealthy. Public service has prevented him from accumulating the kind of fortune that land speculation or commerce provided to others of his generation. More painfully, Adams feels forgotten and unappreciated. Washington is remembered as the indispensable man, the father of his country. Jefferson is celebrated for writing the Declaration of Independence and for his political philosophy. Franklin is lionized for his scientific achievements and diplomatic skill. Adams feels his own contributions, his diplomatic successes, his role in pushing for independence, his presidential achievements, are overlooked or minimized. He's remembered, if at all, as a vain, irritable, unsuccessful president, rather than as a founder who made crucial contributions to American independence. Adams becomes increasingly bitter about Hamilton, whom he blames for Federalist divisions and for his electoral defeat. He also remains angry at Jefferson, believing his former friend sacrificed their relationship for political advantage, and unfairly attacked Adams's character during the campaign. These resentments consume Adams during early retirement, making him increasingly isolated and unhappy. But Adams also remains intellectually active. He reads extensively, history, philosophy, theology, whatever he can obtain. He writes letters to friends and former colleagues, arguing about political philosophy, analyzing historical events, and developing his thoughts on governance and human nature. He works on an autobiography, though he'll never complete it satisfactorily. His mind remains sharp even as his body declines. Gradually, Adams's emotional state improves. Time provides perspective on his presidency and political career. The bitterness fades somewhat, replaced by pride in specific achievements, particularly the peace with France, and by acceptance that history's judgment of presidents takes decades to develop. He begins to see his presidency not as failure, but as a mixed record, including both mistakes and significant accomplishments. In 1809, something remarkable happens. Benjamin Rush, a mutual friend of both Adams and Jefferson, begins encouraging them to reconcile. Rush writes to both men, suggesting that their old friendship deserves to be restored, that political differences shouldn't permanently divide people who once worked together so closely, that both men are old enough to put partisan conflicts behind them. Rush's mediation is gentle but persistent. He genuinely wants these two founders to make peace before they die. Adams is initially resistant. He's still angry at Jefferson, still feels betrayed, still resents how their friendship ended. But Rush's arguments gradually affect him. Adams begins to wonder if holding on to anger and resentment serves any purpose, if perhaps life is too short and history is too important to let partisan politics destroy meaningful relationships. In December 1811, Adams finally writes to Jefferson, a short note, carefully casual, testing whether communication is possible. Jefferson responds warmly and immediately. He's apparently been waiting for Adams to make the first move, and he's genuinely happy to renew their relationship. Jefferson's letter makes clear he values their old friendship and regrets that politics divided them. The warmth of Jefferson's response surprises and delights Adams. Their correspondence begins tentatively, but quickly becomes extensive and deeply engaged. Over the next 14 years, Adams and Jefferson exchange 158 letters. These letters are remarkable documents. Two of America's greatest founders, both in their 70s and 80s, reflecting on their lives, on American history, on political philosophy, on religion, on human nature, on everything that matters to them. They argue, agree, disagree, joke, and share memories of the Revolution and the early Republic. Their correspondence becomes one of the treasures of American intellectual history. The letters reveal both men at their best. Adams is still stubborn and opinionated, but also witty, generous, and willing to laugh at himself. Jefferson is eloquent, philosophical, and deeply engaged with ideas. They disagree about many things: religion. Adams is more conventionally Christian. Jefferson is more deist. Democracy. Jefferson trusts the people more than Adams does, and various historical events. But these disagreements are conducted with respect and affection. One recurring theme is their assessment of their own historical contributions. Both men wonder how history will remember them. Both feel somewhat forgotten or misunderstood by the current generation. Both take pleasure in having been part of creating America, regardless of how they're currently remembered. Adams writes, "You and I ought not to die before we have explained ourselves to each other." The correspondence provides that explanation, allowing both men to understand each other better and to leave a record of their perspectives for future generations. The reconciliation brings Adams genuine happiness. He's restored a friendship that meant enormously to him, has someone with whom he can discuss ideas at the highest level, and has made peace with the political conflicts that had consumed so much bitterness. The letters give structure and purpose to his final years, keeping him intellectually engaged and emotionally connected to the history he helped make. Throughout retirement, Adams also takes pleasure in his children's and grandchildren's accomplishments. His son, John Quincy Adams, has become a distinguished diplomat and politician, serving as senator, ambassador to Russia, Secretary of State under President Monroe, and eventually becoming the sixth president in 1825. Seeing his son achieve the highest office brings Adams great satisfaction. It vindicates his belief that merit and public service matter more than birth or wealth, and it ensures that the Adams family's contributions to American history will continue beyond his own generation. By the mid-1820s, both Adams and Jefferson are in their 80s and declining health. Both men are aware they're approaching the end of their lives. Adams's hands shake severely, making writing difficult. His hearing is failing, and he's increasingly confined to Peacefield. But his mind remains alert, and he continues reading and discussing ideas with visitors who come to see the old founder. As July 4, 1826 approaches, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, both Adams and Jefferson understand the symbolic significance of the date. Both are determined, if possible, to live to see this golden anniversary of American independence. It becomes a race between failing health and meaningful timing, and remarkably, both men win that race. July 4, 1826. At Peacefield in Massachusetts, John Adams lies on his deathbed, surrounded by family. He's weak and barely conscious. At various times during the day, he speaks fragmentary sentences. Near the end, he apparently says, "Thomas Jefferson survives." These words become his famous last words, though some historians question exactly what he said or whether the words were clearly understood. The irony is profound and moving. Adams's last thoughts are apparently of Jefferson, his old friend and rival. He believes Jefferson is still alive and finds comfort in that thought. But Adams is wrong. Jefferson has already died that same day at Monticello in Virginia, several hours before Adams dies in Massachusetts. Both founders die on Independence Day's 50th anniversary, as if history itself is being poetic about their intertwined legacies. The coincidence of both men dying on July 4, 1826, strikes the nation as providential. Newspapers and eulogies speak of divine design, of America's revolutionary generation being called home together, of the appropriateness of the two men who wrote and defended the Declaration dying on its anniversary. The coincidence gives both men's deaths significance beyond ordinary mortality. It becomes part of America's founding mythology. John Adams dies believing he has lived an extraordinary life that mixed triumph and failure, principle and political error, significant achievement and frustrating limitation. He helped create American independence, negotiated crucial treaties, established diplomatic foundations, defended constitutional government, and maintained peace when others wanted war. He also made enemies, lost political battles, and experienced the humiliation of electoral defeat. He was brilliant, stubborn, vain, principled, difficult, honest, and absolutely committed to serving what he believed were America's interests, even when it cost him personally. History's judgment of Adams has evolved over time. He's no longer seen primarily as a failed president, but as a complex, significant founder whose contributions to independence and early American government were crucial. His diplomatic achievements in the Netherlands and in peace negotiations are now recognized as matching any American diplomat's accomplishments. His insistence on maintaining peace with France is seen as wise statesmanship rather than political cowardice. His honesty and principled stubbornness are admired even by those who disagree with his specific positions. John Adams dies having helped create a nation that will long outlive him, having lived according to principles he never compromised, having served his country with absolute dedication, regardless of personal cost. That's the legacy he leaves, not one of easy popularity or simple success, but one of principled service, diplomatic achievement, and unwavering commitment to ideals larger than personal ambition. For Adams, who always valued principle over popularity, that's exactly the legacy he would have chosen. When we remember America's founding generation, certain figures immediately come to mind. Washington, the military hero and first president. Jefferson, the eloquent philosopher of liberty. Franklin, the charming diplomat and Renaissance man. John Adams often stands slightly to the side in these memories, important certainly, but somehow less central, less charismatic, less memorable. This underestimation is precisely wrong. Without John Adams, American independence might never have been declared, certainly wouldn't have been diplomatically secured, and possibly wouldn't have survived its first constitutional crisis. Adams's greatest contribution was being the person who pushed when others hesitated, who argued when consensus seemed impossible, who insisted on principle when pragmatism seemed wiser. He earned the nickname the Atlas of Independence because, like the mythological Titan, he carried the weight of the independence movement on his shoulders during its most crucial moments. Other founders were more eloquent, or more charming, or more militarily skilled, but Adams was the one who wouldn't let independence fail through hesitation or compromise. Consider his role in the Continental Congress of 1775 to 1776. Many delegates hoped for reconciliation with Britain even after fighting had begun. Adams argued relentlessly that independence was both necessary and inevitable. that delay only prolonged suffering, that America must declare independence to achieve international recognition and support. He spoke in debates day after day, lobbied hesitant delegates privately, and organized independent supporters into an effective coalition. When Congress finally voted for independence, it was largely because Adams had made himself so persistently annoying that giving in was easier than continuing to resist. This persistence, which critics called stubbornness and Adams himself recognized as combativeness, was his defining characteristic. He never quit. He never compromised on fundamental principles. He never let political costs deter him from doing what he believed was right. This made him difficult to work with, easy to dislike, and absolutely indispensable. Someone had to be willing to be unpopular in service of necessary goals, and Adams was always willing to play that role. His diplomatic achievements demonstrate how Adams's particular skills proved crucial at specific moments. In the Netherlands, charm and social grace wouldn't have secured Dutch recognition and loans. What worked was Adams's patient, detailed, persistent argumentation and his appeal to Dutch commercial interests. When negotiating the Treaty of Paris, Adams's distrust of French manipulation and his insistence on maximum American goals secured far better terms than Franklin's more trusting approach would have achieved. And as president, his stubborn determination to maintain peace despite political pressure probably saved America from a disastrous war it couldn't afford. Adams's greatest presidential achievement, maintaining peace with France, illustrates both his virtues and why those virtues made him politically unsuccessful. Any politician seeking re-election would have declared war in 1798 when public opinion demanded it, when his own party wanted it, when doing so would have unified the country behind his leadership. Adams chose peace because he believed war would harm America, regardless of its political benefits to him personally. He sacrificed his presidency to serve what he judged to be the national interest. That's admirable leadership by any measure, but it's not successful politics. This tension between principle and political success runs throughout Adams's career. He defended British soldiers at the Boston Massacre because justice required it, knowing it would damage his political standing. He insisted on independent American diplomacy despite French objections, because he believed American interests shouldn't be subordinated to French preferences. He pursued peace with France despite Federalist opposition because he believed peace served America better than war. Each decision was principled, each came at political cost, each demonstrated that Adams valued doing right more than being popular. The Adams-Jefferson correspondence during their final years provides extraordinary insight into Adams's character and historical consciousness. These letters show Adams reflecting on his life, acknowledging mistakes, defending decisions, and trying to understand how history would judge him. He knows he wasn't the most successful president or the most beloved founder, but he also knows he made crucial contributions that others couldn't or wouldn't make. He pushed for independence when others hesitated. He secured diplomatic recognition and loans when others couldn't. He maintained peace when others wanted war. That's his legacy, and he accepts it. Adams's marriage to Abigail represents one of American history's great partnerships. Abigail was Adams's intellectual equal, his closest advisor, and his emotional anchor. Their correspondence during his many years away from home reveals a relationship of genuine intellectual partnership rare for their era. Abigail managed the family finances, the farm, and the children, while Adams served in Philadelphia and Europe. She also provided political advice that Adams valued above almost anyone else's. Their marriage demonstrates that Adams, for all his difficulty with other men, could form a partnership based on equality and mutual respect with someone he trusted completely. The comparison with Jefferson is instructive. Jefferson was more eloquent, more charming, more optimistic about human nature and democratic government. Adams was more realistic, more pessimistic, more convinced that government needed strong structures to constrain human selfishness and faction. Jefferson trusted the people. Adams trusted institutions. Jefferson believed in progress. Adams believed in cycles of growth and decline. Both perspectives had merit, and American government has benefited from the creative tension between these Jeffersonian and Adamsian visions. Adams's legacy extends through his son, John Quincy Adams, the 6th president, and through a family tradition of public service that continues through subsequent generations. The Adams family's contributions to American history span multiple generations and demonstrate Adams's belief that merit, education, and dedicated service matter more than birth or wealth. John Adams rose from modest origins through his own abilities and efforts. He ensured his children received educations that prepared them for similar service. The family became American aristocracy not through inherited privilege, but through generations of earned achievement. Modern historical scholarship has elevated Adams's reputation significantly above where it stood during his lifetime or in the immediate decades after his death. Historians now recognize his diplomatic achievements as crucial to American independence, see his constitutional thought as sophisticated and influential, and understand his presidential decision-making as principled even when politically costly. Adams is no longer dismissed as a failed president, but understood as a complex, important founder whose contributions were different from, but equally important to, those of Washington, Jefferson, or Franklin. Perhaps Adams's most important legacy is his demonstration that democratic government requires leaders willing to sacrifice popularity for principle, willing to make unpopular decisions when they believe those decisions serve the national interest, willing to accept political defeat rather than compromising what they believe is right. Democracy needs popular leaders who can mobilize support and build consensus. But it also needs principled leaders willing to resist popular passion when that passion conflicts with long-term national interests. Adams was that kind of leader, unpopular but principled, difficult but dedicated, unsuccessful politically, but ultimately right about the most important questions he faced. John Adams died believing his contributions would be forgotten or minimized. He was wrong. His diplomatic achievements in securing Dutch recognition and loans, his role in negotiating the Treaty of Paris, and his presidential decision to maintain peace with France are now recognized as crucial moments in American history. His stubborn insistence on independence when others hesitated, his distrust of French manipulation when others were more trusting, and his willingness to sacrifice political success for what he believed was right. These defined his career and left America stronger than it would have been without him. The man who called the vice presidency the most insignificant office and who lost re-election as president, nevertheless left a legacy that few Americans have matched. He helped create American independence, secured international recognition, established diplomatic foundations, defended constitutional government, and demonstrated that leadership sometimes requires choosing principle over popularity. That's not the legacy of someone insignificant. It's the legacy of someone indispensable, even if the indispensability came through stubborn persistence rather than through charm or popularity. John Adams was the Atlas who held the world of American independence on his shoulders when it might have collapsed. He was the voice arguing for declaration when others hesitated. He was the diplomat securing recognition when others had failed. He was the president choosing peace when others wanted war. He was stubborn, difficult, vain, opinionated, and absolutely essential. American history without John Adams is almost unimaginable, because so many crucial moments depended on his particular combination of principle, persistence, and refusal to compromise or quit. That's his legacy, the founder who wouldn't let America fail, regardless of personal cost.